All right. So this is just kind of a quick little tutorial for students on something called parallel structure. And that's something where when we're writing a sentence and say we have items in a series, maybe it's nouns, maybe it's infinitive forms of verbs, anything that we want to list in a kind of a series format. We want to be sure that we list those in a way that is easy on the reader to digest, understand, and easy to read, basically. And the chief way that we do that is by being sure that we list them in the same form. And that's basically parallel structure. It may sound kind of fancy when I say it, but that's all it is. We just want to be sure that we're listing these kinds of things when we're building our sentences in the same sort of format from one item to the next. And basically what I'm going to do in this video is show you some examples of sentences that have very good parallel structure, and then some that have some bad ones. And we want to be able to use it effectively, again, because it helps, but also because you'll see sentences that don't have parallel structure in them, and really need it, because you'll read it and you'll be like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. And anyway, you'll see the ones that do use it, and it'll be it's like, oh, okay, this is why we do that kind of thing. It's actually something that we tend to do naturally. It's just not something that we always think of when we're doing our work. And of course, we want to be sure that we think of that consistently and follow those rules. So let's take a look here, and this will help you kind of find it on quizzes, and also inevitably use it in your own work. And just give me a quick second here, and I'll bring up some examples for you. All right, so this is going to go into some examples of parallel sentence structure. And all this is really, it's just a way of showing the reader some sentences that are written in a clear way, basically writing in a manner that keeps our longer sentences readable, and it can help us arrange items in a series, maybe have some different verbs in there, and then while essentially making it easier on the reader to make it through. So we'll go through a couple of quick examples and talk a little bit more about what it is. If you have any questions, review the textbook. You can ask me questions during class or shoot me an email. Excuse me, just ate lunch. Or you can come by during my office hours, and I will give you a hand. All right, let's get rolling here. Okay, so items in a series. Here we have a sentence that has some modifiers really that are in a series here. That's some modifiers modifying some nouns here that are attributes of Jill, basically. And here we have the teacher praising Jill for her clear writing, unique story ideas, and natural storytelling ability. So we see here that we have 3 items in a series here, and they're all written in kind of a similar sort of way, and they all work with for her. Okay, and the way that we can kind of tell that is if we took one of those out, we took out the conjunction. If we took all of them out except for one, really, including the conjunction, then it would all work with for her. So the teacher praised Jill for her natural storytelling ability. The teacher praised Jill for her clear writing, etc. Okay? This is how we arrange items in a series in a similar form, in the same form, and it makes the sentence a little more readable, and kind of helps establish a rhythm that gets the reader through the sentence and process our ideas a little more efficiently. All right, so let's start this one here. The teacher praised Jill for her clear writing, unique story ideas, and how smart she is. Well, as you can tell here, how smart she is not in the same form as clear writing or unique story ideas here. So, and in the way you can kind of tell these things, a dead giveaway should be when you read it out loud to yourself. There's something about it that doesn't quite seem right, and that's the what's going on here basically is that this modifier is really this attribute is in the wrong sort of form. So we would essentially change it to something that's in the same form as clear writing or unique story ideas. So it might be, instead of how smart she is, it could be intelligence or savvy or street smarts, whatever kind of thing you want to throw in there. But it just has to be in the same form as the other items in the series that precede it. All right, let's move it on. More items in a series. Just what you always wanted. This is right here. The dog was as smart as, or at least as smart as, the cat. So we need all of those ases in there. Okay? That helps us out when we're making comparisons. We want to be sure that we're comparing apples to apples here. And part of the the way that we go about doing that is being sure that we have these conjunctions here, which is really what as is. As a conjunction, be sure that they're in the same form. We've got the same format for each of the items there that we're comparing. So here's the wrong one. The dog was as smart, or at least as smart as the cat. Okay, so we need as in there. Okay, so moving on here. Now we're going to make verbs parallel, which is what I know that you've always wanted to do deep down in your hearts. Ever since you were a child, you wanted to know how to make verbs parallel. Well, your dreams are all going to be coming true in the next few seconds here. So parallel sentence structure also applies to when we have several verbs in a longer sentence too. It's not just items in a series. Usually, if it comes up here, it's when we're trying to relate a series of events. We'll talk about the order in which things occurred. And we generally prefer short sentences, and so these would be in use when we have a long sentence, and for some reason we want to keep that long sentence, and this just helps us write these sort of long sentences that have several verbs in them in a way that makes it easier on the reader to get through. All right, so really what we want here is we want verbs to be in the same form. We definitely don't want to change verb tense in the same sentence unless there's something that has to do with the meaning of the sentence that brings that on. But usually what we're going to do is use the same verb tense in each sentence. And here we have, first, OSU point guard Marcus Smart drove to his left from the top of the key, then he faked to his right, and then he spun to his left, hitting a 15-foot jumper over his defender. So here we've got three verbs, okay? And each one of these, as you'll note, they're in what kind of tense? Past tense, okay? And so they're all in the same form. So not only are we showing an order of events, we're also showing the order of events in which they occurred in the past, right? So and if you take out the parts of the sentence that don't refer to one of these verbs here, you'll note that they all work back with Marcus Smart, okay? Marcus Smart drove to his left on top of the key. It also works with, work with he. He faked to his right. Then he spun to his left. So again, all of these things are talking about something that happened in the past here, and we're trying to indicate to the reader the order in which they occurred. Well, we just want to be sure that we've got those verbs then in the same format. The same thing would go with future tense. If we were talking about something that hasn't happened yet, and we would want to be sure that all of those verbs are in the future tense. Okay. All right. So we could also rewrite it to make it shorter, which I would probably recommend. But basically, this is just an example of how we would keep these things in the same sort of form here. All right, so what if we want to change tense in a sentence? This is something that can be confusing, but there are times when we want to do that. Here's one. So Professor Elliot used to play video games, but stopped because he thinks men in their 30s shouldn't play video games. It's funny because it's true, but getting past the humor in it is that we're talking about something that I did in the past, so that I used to do something. So that part is going to be in the past tense because it talks about something that no longer takes place, right? Well, the part that's in present tense, he thinks is going to be, to say that I believe this now, okay? So these verbs are parallel in that they are all working towards sort of the same thought, but they are, but they're in different tenses here. And this is one of the times then when you can obviously switch tense in the middle of a paragraph. But that is, or a sentence, and that is, again, not something that we want to do frequently, but there are times when it's called for. All right, so let's go into a little more parallel verbs here, which I know, again, is what you've always wanted. So how do we fix this one? The president was disciplined by the board and then left. One thing, if you'll remember, we talked about different voices in our writing here. We've talked about passive voice and active voice. And if you need a little more practice with that, check out my passive voice, active voice video tutorial on D2L, and you can go back over your notes from lecture. There's also, in the index of your textbook, there's a part that refers back to passive voice. We prefer active voice, and if you remember what that is that's when the subject is doing the acting. Okay, the subject is not being acted upon here. So, but if we look at the president was disciplined by the board here. The subject of the sentence is what? It's the president, okay? And is the president doing anything? Well, in that first clause there, the president was disciplined by the board. He or she is not, okay? The board is acting back on the president, so that's passive voice. Okay, well, let's look at the other verb, okay? And then left. Well, it's clear that we're not talking about the board here. We're talking about the president. And if you'll recall what active voice is, that's when the subject, again, is doing the action. So the president left. Well, quite clearly the subject is not being acted on there. The president is doing something. So that's active voice. So here we have a sentence that is switching from active to passive voice in the middle of the sentence here. And it's very difficult to read. It's awkward. We want to be sure that we avoid that. Okay? So our verbs need to be in the same voice. And there are a couple different ways that we could correct that. We could change it up to the board disciplined the president, who then left. Okay? The president left after the board disciplined him or her. All right. There's not really necessarily a correct answer between those two there, but just know that we do not want to switch voice in mid-sentence. And if we are going to, obviously we're going to use a voice whenever we write, right? It's either going to be passive or active. Just know that we prefer active voice, okay? All right, so more parallel verbs. So verbs also should be parallel in mood, okay? So if you can think back to your grade school grammar classes, you probably thought that when we were trying to learn verb moods, that was pretty useless. But the fact is that we use them all the time. We always use the imperative mood when we're trying to issue a command. When we're just making a statement, that's a declarative statement. When we're asking a question, that's interrogative. When we're posing something that's a condition or something that's contrary to something that depends on something else, that's when we use the conditional. We want to be sure that our moods are the same in our paragraph or in our sentence. And read your textbook and study your notes before class is an example of, we have two independent clauses here that are both written in the imperative mood, right? Because we will remember that the imperative mood is when we are giving a command. Read your textbook, that's a command. Okay? You is the implied subject there. Study your notes before class, that's a command. Okay? So both of these two independent clauses are imperative, right? We're not switching mood mid-sentence here. So I'm going to show you some then where we switch mood and it's really confusing, or at least it's awkward. And so again, we want to be sure that we avoid it. So here's how it could go wrong. Read your textbook and then it's necessary to study your notes. Well, we all know that that's not right when we read it. I mean, we see that there on the PowerPoint slide and we know that that's not correct. Well, the tough thing is just remembering to look for these kinds of things when we write things on our own. And so this is just a final sort of example here in our parallel structure series. And want to be sure again that we're not switching verb moods back and forth. Okay, and the big thing to really do to help fix this kind of stuff and avoid issues with parallel structure is basically just to take some time and read your stuff out loud to yourself. Other things that help is showing your work to other people who can edit it. So we're not going to have them do it for us, right? Because it's not right, but we'll show it to them, and they can say, well, offer some suggestions, make some editing, things like that. That is something that professionals do all the time, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that, with asking people for advice on things. All right, you've reached the end. Congratulations. And just remember then, we use this stuff to make our sentences, it helps our sentences be readable, especially our longer ones. It improves their readability. Otherwise, the rhythm's a little messed up and they're harder to read. And if our sentences are hard to read, then it's less likely that the reader is going to get the gist of our sentences, and then it's also going to be less likely for them to receive our overall message, which is obviously at that point we've failed as a communicator, right? If we can't, if we're writing things that people aren't getting our message out of, then we've got some issues. So this is just a big thing that we can work on, and if we know what to look for, it's pretty simple to do. So just focus on keeping your verbs and items in a series in the same forms when we have several in one sentence. Okay, that's all it is. And just be sure we're reading these things out loud to ourselves. All right.